Hello and welcome to Hot and Heavy, the Elaine Bennis podcast. I'm your host, Shivani Desai. Today I'll be talking about Season 6, Episode 22, The Face Painter. Hello, everyone. I hope everyone's doing well. Winding down summer for a lot of us. My kids are, my daughter went back to school today. She's in middle school, so she starts a couple of days early. And then my son will start next week. And quite the opposite reactions to school starting. My daughter could not have been more excited to start 8th grade, and my son is not excited about 5th grade. I think he's heard about 5th grade being pretty intense, a lot of work. And he did not get the teacher he really wanted, unfortunately. But, hey, it's a good lesson for the kids, right? You just have to say, make the best of it. You don't always get what you want. So chin up, buttercup. I never said that to him, but, that was the general message. Other than that, we squeezed in one last trip to Telluride for the summer, and it was amazing. I love Telluride. I think I've said it before on this podcast. If you have the chance to experience Telluride, do it. It is just absolutely gorgeous. Not only is it just so picturesque, but it also allowed us to escape the extreme heat that we're having where we live in Colorado. So, you go up in the mountains, it's a little cooler up there. So it was just a great trip all around. Nice little getaway for the fam before everything starts with school. All right, so let's get into this episode. The synopsis for The Face Painter is as follows. Elaine is disturbed to find her boyfriend, David Putty, paints his face for hockey games. Jerry gets free hockey playoff tickets, but ends up losing additional tickets because he didn't say thank you enough times. George is bothered by the fact that his girlfriend didn't return his I love you in kind. Kramer's spat with the zoo chimpanzee named Barry causes the simian to suffer depression. This episode was written by Larry David and Fred Stoller. All right, we start out in George's car. George is on a date with his girlfriend, Sienna. And he's talking about how toilet paper has never changed and probably won't change in their lifetime. And she agrees, yeah, you're right, George. George can't believe it that she actually finds this interesting. Yes, I do. And then they start kissing passionately. The actress who plays Sienna is Katie Silverstone. After she was on Seinfeld, she was a regular on Drew Carey, and she had just a handful of credits in the 90s. She doesn't really seem to be acting anymore, very much at least. A lot of independent projects I've seen, kind of sporadic throughout the 2000s. She does do quite a bit of theater and off-Broadway productions. And I think she's fine as Sienna. There's not really much to the character. Another one of these kind of no-dimensional girlfriend characters. But I think she's very sweet. All right, next we're at Monk's. Elaine and Jerry are at a booth. A busboy picks up her soup bowl and she tells him, thanks, the soup was very good. And he kind of looks uncomfortable and walks away. Jerry's like, what the hell are you telling him for? He doesn't care. Elaine thinks he would want to know if the soup is good. And Jerry vehemently disagrees. You think he's back there telling the chef, hey, they like the soup, keep it up. Elaine notices Alec Berg walk in, and Jerry talks about how he's got a great John Houseman name and does that impression, Mr. Berg. For those of you who were curious and didn't feel like looking it up, John Houseman was an old actor and producer, but most notably he was known as the head of drama at Juilliard and actually taught Robin Williams and Christopher Reeve. I thought that was kind of cool. Anyway, back to the scene, Elaine says, she can't stand Alec Berg. He is so pretentious. So Alec comes over to the table and greets them and asks Jerry if he heard about Gary Fogle. And he's like, yeah, you going to the funeral on Friday? Yeah, Jerry says. Hey, did I see you on TV at the Ranger game with those great seats right behind the glass? And Alex says, yeah, season tickets. Then he offers the tickets to them for that night because he can't use them. And Jerry's like, hey, of course, we'll take them. Yeah, just call my secretary and she'll arrange everything. Jerry thanks him twice. Gee, thanks. Thanks a lot. Then he says, actually, I may not be able to use them on Friday, so I'll let you know. Jerry thanks him again. Thanks again. And Elaine even thanks him. Thank you very much. Jerry again says thank you. Really? Thank you. I think most of you know why I'm counting the thank yous, which there are technically 5 between Jerry and Elaine. So Alec gets 5 thank yous. All right, my take on this scene, that busboy conversation at the top of the scene really makes me laugh. Those kinds of conversations are like the crux of Seinfeld. Those little observations or call outs like, what the hell are you doing? That you don't need to do that. So I think that's super funny. I love Jerry's face. Like, what the hell are you telling him for? And Elaine's so innocent too. She's like, what? Wouldn't he want the soup to be good? There's really not much to Elaine's portion here. We're just getting a lot of the setup for the episode. We get Alec Berg there. We get the hockey tickets, Gary Fogel's funeral, and all the thinking. All right, next we're in Jerry's apartment. He and Elaine are in a conversation about nitwits on planes who don't bring anything to read. These are the people that want to talk to you. They got nothing else to do, so they want to disturb you. Elaine says, I will never understand people. They're the worst. George enters with flowers and he's singing a song. Elaine loves the flowers. She opens her arms to receive them, but they're not for her. George kind of fakes that he's going to give them to her, but then he pulls them away. What is with you? Well, he thinks this is it. What's it? I saw Sienna again last night. Sienna? Yeah, he's dating a crayon. Great line. George tells them how they discuss toilet paper. Huh? You know, how there's been no change in toilet paper, and she was fascinated. And Jerry and Elaine point out how wrong he is. Tons of advancements in toilet paper. Well, anyway, he gets annoyed. It's not really the point. Anyway, he's thinking about making a big move. He's thinking about telling her he loves her. Ooh, Elaine and Jerry are like, yikes. That's a big move, Georgie boy. Are you confident in the I love you return? He says, 50-50. Because if you don't get that return, that's a pretty big matzo ball hanging out there. George is like, well, I just have to say it once. Everybody else gets to say it. Why can't I? Elaine's like, you've never said it? Once to a dog. He licked himself and walked away. Oh, so it wasn't a total loss. Kramer enters and Jerry tells him, oh my gosh, I got tickets for the Ranger Devil playoff game tonight. Ooh, well, Kramer is there, my andalila, or whatever he says. George says, no, he's got a date and that he'd rather spend time with her than go to the game. Kramer's pretty excited for him. Must be a special lady, huh? Yeah. That part cracks me up. Elaine thinks about Putty for the extra ticket since he's a big Devils fan. And George mentions that, if anyone wants a behind-the-scenes tour of the zoo, his girlfriend Sienna works there as a trainer. Kramer compares her to Diane Fossey, the only human to be accepted into gorilla society. And once those gorillas accept you, you got it made in the shade. My take on this scene, the little conversation at the top is really fun about never understanding people. I quote this all the time in my life. I will never understand people. They're the worst. Yeah, that's said at least 3 times a week in my house. The little fake out with the flowers, really good moment. Great George and Elaine moment. And I got to say, Jason Alexander steals this scene for me. I mean, Giddy George is adorable. You can't deny it. I do not understand, though, why Elaine would be basically silent in the whole I love you discussion. As a woman, she'd have something to say. And as Elaine, she'd have something to say. We could have gotten maybe an anecdote from Elaine's point of view. I just feel like this was a wasted opportunity. Why was this just really one-sided? Especially because she says, what, you never said it? Because she seems surprised. So it's like they all seem to have I love you experience except for George. So I just think they could have mined a little bit more, maybe background information about the characters here, especially Elaine. Because I would think they would want a woman's perspective on this, but I digress. I digress a lot when I think Elaine gets totally gypped on contributions to the plot lines. All right, next we're at Elaine's apartment. Elaine's on her couch. She's asking Putty, who's in the back, how long he's been a Devils fan. And he says he's from Jersey, so pretty much his whole life. Yeah, well, we're going to kick your butts tonight. Hey, no way, man. We're prime. She asks if he's almost ready because Jerry and Kramer are going to be there any minute. And she turns around to see him emerging from the hallway in full devil face paint. She stumbles in horror. What is that? I painted my face. Why? Support the team. Well, you can't walk around like that. Why not? Because it's insane. And Putty's like, no, this is a playoffs. You got to let them know you're out there. There's a knock on the door and Putty answers. Kramer, of course, stumbles with a jump scare. And Jerry's also like, what the hell is this? Elaine explains Dave's painted his face. Kramer says, yeah, that's cool. You gotta support your team. And Putty's like, all right, we ready to go? Let's get it on! Let's go Devils! Let's go Devils! And Elaine looks at Jerry in horror and confusion on the way out. My take on this scene, well, clearly this scene is all about Putty's face, but there are great reactions from JLD here. I love the startled stumble, I guess you can call it. Like she literally almost falls over. I think anyone would. It's very jarring. And her line, because it's insane, never fails to make me laugh. I just love the delivery of that. The little shrug in the middle of the sentence, like, dumbass, like this is obvious. And I love the reactions from Kramer and Jerry too. And I also love how Kramer totally understands this. Like he's like, yeah, that's cool. Of course, Kramer would not judge. All right, next we are at Madison Square Garden at the hockey game. Putty is all up on the glass, pounding, screaming, "You stink, Messier! You stink, Messier!" And other fans are yelling at him to sit down. Hey, man, I'm just trying to support the team. Elaine is trying to get him to sit down. Would you please stop? You're making everyone mad. Oh, you're just upset because I'm getting in their heads. What? And he gets back up and screams and pounds on the glass because the Devils have scored. My take here, not much to say, but Putty is hilarious. Then next we're in George's car. George and Sienna are listening to the hockey game and react to the Devils making a goal. And George says, I could have gone to the game tonight. She asks why he didn't. Because I didn't want to break our date. Oh, she's so flattered. And George continues his statement, because I love you. And then she says, I'm hungry. Let's get something to eat. Ugh. All right, next we're on the street. Putty is so excited about the Devils' win. He's trash talking the other three in their faces as they walk. Kramer says, okay, enough out of you. This is far from being over. And then Putty goes to cross the street and almost gets hit by a car. So he starts yelling at the people in the car, watch where you're driving, man. He goes over to the passenger side where there's a priest sitting there. He starts screaming into the window, don't mess with the devil, buddy. We're number one. We beat anybody. We're the Devils. The Devils. And he runs away. And the priest is so freaked out. El Diablo. All right, next we are at Monk's, and Jerry's reacting to Sienna's response to George. I'm hungry. Let's get something to eat. Big matzo ball, huge matzo ball. And George is convinced that the relationship is going to deteriorate now that there's an I love you out of the bag. You can't go on when someone says I love you and the other says I'm hungry. Let's get something to eat. Unless you're married, Jerry says, which is brutally true. All right, next we are in Jerry's apartment. Jerry enters and Kramer is right after him. And Kramer tells him about this encounter he had at the zoo with a monkey before meeting up with Sienna for his tour. And apparently this monkey threw a banana peel at him and really laughed it up, so he threw it back at him. And Jerry thinks it's wrong, but Kramer defends himself and says the monkey started it. And Kramer is really offended that Jerry would take the monkey's side. I'm not taking anyone's side. Well, I know what happened, Jerry. And then Kramer remembers, hey, did you call Alec Berg to thank him for the hockey tickets? And Jerry's like, no. What are you waiting for? Jerry says, I thanked him 5 times when he gave them to me. Why do I have to call? No, Kramer says it's common courtesy to call the next day. Well, you know what? Jerry is taking a stand against all this overthinking. And Kramer tells him, you know what? He's going to be pissed about not getting the next day thank you call, and he won't give us the tickets for Friday. Jerry doesn't think so. And Jerry's headed out. He needs to get a suit cleaned. He's going to a funeral on Friday. And Jerry tells Kramer, remember the guy who pretended to have cancer so I would buy him the toupee? So he actually had it? Kramer said. No, car accident. He was trying to adjust the toupee while driving and lost control of the car. All right, next we are at the funeral of Gary Fogle. And Jerry and Elaine are sitting together. Elaine is telling Jerry about that poor priest who was just visiting from El Salvador. And now he's gone totally loco. The one Putty screamed at in the car? Yes, he thinks he saw the devil. Jerry says, well, that's what you get for getting mixed up with the face painter. And Elaine wonders what compels a seemingly normal person to do something like that. Jerry does his impression of Putty. Gotta support the team. Then we hear this crying and wailing off screen. I mean, people are just beside themselves, while Elaine and Jerry show absolutely no emotion. Elaine changes the subject about how she hates her clothes. She has nothing to wear. She hates everything she has. We hear more crying and wailing and crying and more wailing and why? Then Elaine continues about her wardrobe problem. She can really only wear something 3 or 4 times and that's it. It's becoming a real problem for me. Then Alec Berg enters and Jerry says hi to him, but Alec doesn't have the greatest reaction. He's kind of cold and barely acknowledges the greeting. Jerry is confused. What was that? And Elaine just shrugs. She doesn't know. All right, my take on this scene. For me, this scene is so memorable because of the bloopers associated with it. I've seen bloopers for this scene many times, and they float around a lot of times on the internet. Honestly, the whole scene is really funny only because of the off-camera crying and wailing, which, by the way, is done by Carol Leifer. She's a writer for the show, but she also played Wendy's receptionist, Wendy with the bad hair. And it's Carol Leifer's off-camera performance, which causes JLD to break over and over again for this scene. I have to say, I am not a fan of Elaine getting invested in this priest. It's not funny at all. And it really doesn't go anywhere unless you count the tag at the end of the episode, which I'll get to it, but I think is really stupid. So yeah, I don't understand, are we supposed to think that she goes up to the car afterwards and talks to him? It just seems very random to me and it's just not funny. I do like in this scene the juxtaposition of Elaine's sort of wardrobe subject matter amongst the grieving people around them. It's really funny. I like that. I like that we're showing how unemotional these two are. They'll go to the funeral, but they don't really give a shit. All right, next we are at the zoo. Kramer is meeting with the head zookeeper who tells him that his confrontation with Barry the chimp has made him quite depressed and that they'd like Kramer to apologize. Yeah, well, he started it. Mr. Kramer, he's an innocent primate. Well, so am I. What about my feelings? Don't my feelings count? Oh, only the poor monkey's important. Everything has to be done for the monkey. Then he sort of calms down and says, I'm sorry. Sienna's there as well. She says, it's okay. And that she has to go to feed the marmoset. On her way out, Kramer tells her that George really likes you, but she just keeps walking. And Kramer looks at her boss, kind of confused. Oh, she doesn't hear very well out of her left ear. All right, next we're at Jerry's apartment. Jerry's asking George, is it possible Alec Berg is mad because he didn't get the day after thank you? And then George clarifies he was at a funeral. Look, no one's going to be really enthusiastic with their hellos at a funeral. And George does this impression of a funeral hello, which I love. Hi, yeah. And Jerry's like, yeah, that's sort of what he did. Kramer enters and tells George that he just spoke to his girlfriend, tells him how, I was told to apologize to Barry the monkey. And nothing doing. He's not going to do that. I didn't do anything wrong. And that the monkey should be apologizing to him. Yeah, Jerry says, I don't think that's going to happen. And then Kramer goes over to George and tells him how he tried to put in a good word for him with Sienna, but she didn't hear me, left ear. And George doesn't know. Yeah, her boss told me she doesn't hear too well out of her left ear. And George has this huge realization. Oh my God, she probably never heard the I love you. This is like a do-over, like it never happened. Like when Superman reversed the rotation of the earth to save Lois Lane. So Jerry's like, well, what are you going to do? Are you going to say it again? That's the question, Jimmy. I do have to say, I remember, so the original Superman where that scene that George is talking about happens, that came out in 1978, but they must have re-released it when I was 6 or 7, because I remember seeing it in the theater. And I remember that scene in particular, the amazing special effects. I mean, I shouldn't rip on it. It was the 80s. And now twice I'm mentioning Christopher Reeve in this episode, which is kind of amazing. But anyway, he played Superman. And yeah, I can visualize that very scene and remember how I felt thinking, oh my God, that is so cool. What if we could really do that? That's amazing. Just reversing the rotation of the earth to make time go backwards. I loved it. All right, next we are in Jerry's apartment. Again, it's just kind of a continuation of the last scene. George comes out of the crapper and says, all right, he's going to do it. He's going to say it again. And Jerry's like, after all you've been through, you're going to do it again? And George says, I'd like to say it once to somebody who can actually hear it. And then George exits. Kramer enters and asks Jerry about talking to Alec Berg at the funeral. And Jerry's like, yeah, I saw him. Oh, good. So he's going to give you the hockey tickets? Not necessarily. Kramer knew it. He's mad, isn't he? And then Jerry tries to explain about the whole funeral hello thing. And Kramer is smugly telling Jerry, I told you. What do you want me to do? I want you to get on this phone and thank him right now. Jerry's very stubborn. No, I can't. Aren't you a part of society? Kramer asks. If not, then just move to the east side, which I'm sure New Yorkers would get, but I don't really get it. And Jerry insists they still have 5 hours until the game. He thinks it was a funeral hello. Alec knows we want to go. He knows the number. I think he's going to call. And Kramer is so pissed. You stubborn, stupid, silly man. All right, next we're at Elaine's apartment. Putty and Elaine are just hanging out, and he's eating some dip, and he really likes it. Did you make this? No, it's from the store. And he asks why chips and dip can't be a meal. Why is it just a snack? I don't understand stuff like that. Elaine just stares at him. She's really pondering this relationship, you can tell. Well, finally, she says, David, I think we ought to talk. All right, that's cool. She tells him she doesn't think they should see each other anymore. You gotta be kidding. How come? Well, you're a face painter. Yeah, that's right. And she says, to be honest, she's having some trouble getting past the face painting. And so Putty says, okay, well, I just won't paint my face anymore. Well, you like the face painting. And he responds, well, it's not like a habit or anything. I don't have to do it. Oh, you'd stop it for me? Yeah, that's right. Elaine is so flattered. Oh, that's so sweet. And they kiss, and he says, all right, I got to go home and change before the game. I'll come back. We'll make out. All right, my take on this scene, I really like this scene. The banality of Putty's dip comment is simple, but so sort of demonstrative of how not deep Putty is. And clearly Elaine has been, the whole face painting thing has altered her view of him. She's been turned off, or at least shaken up by that, face painting reveal. And I think his dip question pushes her over the edge in that moment. I just love how the explanation is, you're a face painter, like full stop. That's it. And then maybe also, I thought about this as I was writing my notes, like also maybe because she's, has all this sympathy for the priest for whatever reason. Maybe that's altered her view too. Like, hey, you yelled at a priest as well. And I also love the switch of how flattered she is when he says he'd give up the face painting for her. She's just like, oh my God, that's so sweet. I think this is also just shows how crappy the men have been in Elaine's life, that just a man giving up something as stupid as face painting is like, almost gets her choked up. Like, oh, that's so sweet. And as a self-admitted nerd for sitcoms and writing, I always try and kind of keep it in my head, or it just by default, my brain goes to, does this track with the character? Is this really in line with our Elaine? And sometimes, especially with Putty, some of the things don't make sense. Like, I think Elaine wouldn't put up with someone who does like face paint. Like, I just don't see it happening. But I also remember in that inside look for a couple episodes ago where Putty made his debut, Jerry Seinfeld said, this was, we thought, the perfect guy to trip Elaine up. So she's going to stick it out with this guy. So yeah, I try to remember that, like, okay, Putty's there to trip her up. He certainly isn't up to her standards. But then as we chip away at her character, I don't know, man, like she's not the best person either. So I think ultimately they might be a match made in heaven. Oh, and then the make out comment at the end gets me every time. He just throws away that line. I'll come back. We'll make out. All right. Next, we are back in George's car. I just have to say, side note, why do they hang out in the car so much? Like, they're adults. Like, go in your apartments. But anyway, back to the scene. George and Sienna are kissing, and he pulls away, positions her head straight at him, and says, Sienna, I love you. And she says, yeah, I know. I heard you the first time. Oh, he says, just confirming. All right, next we're in Jerry's apartment. Jerry is sitting and waiting for the phone to ring. And it does ring, but it's his mother, and he explains very quickly how he cannot talk, he's waiting on a call, and cannot trust the call waiting in an emergency, and hangs up. All right, next we're at the zoo, and Kramer is at the monkey exhibit with Barry the chimpanzee. And he's apologizing, he admits he lost his temper, and he regrets if that caused him any pain, even though you started it. But anyway, let's just move on, okay? And then Barry the monkey spits in Kramer's face. And I have to mention, Barry is so cute. That little face. Oh, so adorable. All right, next we're back at Elaine's apartment. Putty and Elaine are making out on the couch, just like he said they would. She goes to take his shirt off and sees a big letter D painted on his chest. And she's not too happy about it. Why is there a D painted on your chest? And he explains how he and a bunch of guys are going to the game later and they're going to spell out devils. But you said no more painting. No, I said no more face painting. And as you can see, this is not my face. Yeah, that's right, Elaine says. My take on the scene, it's a funny scene. Look at great reactions from JLD here. She actually ad-libbed the yeah, that's right at the end. So yay, a little ad-lib for JLD there. And I really like and as you can see, this is not my face. Oh, it's a technicality. All right, next we are at Jerry's apartment. Jerry is still waiting. Kramer enters. No call yet. And he says, oh, come on, Jerry, it's 6 o'clock. Just pick up the phone and thank him. And so Jerry begrudgingly calls, and he tries to soften his conversation with Alec Berg with his John Houseman name joke and his impression. Alec is not impressed. So he says, anyway, I'd like to thank you for the tickets the other night. And Alec says, well, I wish you would have called earlier. He's already given the tickets away. But he says he does know some other guys with tickets, and if he doesn't mind the nosebleed section, they're his. And Jerry says, no, we don't care. We just want to go. But there is one catch. So next we're at the hockey game, and we see what the catch is. Jerry and Kramer are shirtless next to Putty, so they're part of the spelling out the devils, and they are the E and the V in the lineup of dudes. And they have to stand up individually and say their letter and then just start cheering for the devils. And then there's a tag to the episode where Elaine visits the El Salvadoran priest in the basement of the church. And basically, because it was raining and then it stopped raining, she looks like the Virgin Mary because of the hood and the light coming through the window. And the priest freaks out because he thinks he's dying. And my take, and I'm sure you can tell from my tone and what I alluded to earlier, I'm not a fan of this at all. Way too much of a stretch, and it's just unnecessary and unfunny. All right, I'm going to take a quick break, and I will see you on the other side. 2 words, 8 letters, 2 syllables. Thank you. Even though 99% of people learn this beautiful sentence before the age of 2 years old, 48% of the population does not know the correct way to use these 2 wonderful words. Did you know that 82% of people have either overthanked or underthanked at least twice in the first 25 years of life? Shocking, right? If this has gotten you thinking about your own use of these words of gratitude, then you need my book, Thank Tank, Spank That Thank. My name is Maze Goldenrod, and I earned my bachelor's in the appreciation arts from Harvard University, achieved a master's in gratitude from Cornell, and a PhD in thank you-ology from Queens College. In my book, Thank Tank, Spank That Thank, I cover the common misconceptions about thanking. Like, did you know it's actually rude to thank anyone at a library? It's true. I bet you didn't know that the appropriate amount of thank yous for any kind of free tickets is 13 over a span of 6 days, with at least 3 of the thank yous occurring via phone. Yeah, I'm blowing your mind, I know. Order your copy of Thank Tank, Spank That Thank by going to my website, hornyforgratitude.thanks. For a limited time, you will receive a special gift, but only if you thank me appropriately for writing my book. Thank Tank, Spank That Thank.
Thank you for listening. I really appreciate you taking the time to listen to this advertisement. Thank you very much. I cannot thank you enough for your attention. Thanks. Thanks a lot. Thank you so much. I really thank you.
And we're back. For the extras in this episode, there were some things in the notes about nothing I wanted to mention. Elaine has a deleted dialogue in that first scene she's in where she says, "Then how does one compliment a busboy?" And Jerry replies, "You comment on his outfit, how many dishes he can hold, what a good job he did trimming his mustache." So that was a little bit more dialogue she would have gotten. This episode was filmed last for the season, but aired second to last. And I already mentioned this, the off-screen wailing and crying at the funeral is done by Carol Leifer, who, what a fun job. I just think about how fun that would be that day. And again, look up those bloopers. It is so funny. I want to say when Carol Leifer does the why, I want to say JLD's like, come on, like, you guys, I can barely take regular wailing and crying, and now you're going to scream why like Nancy Kerrigan? Come on. Anyway, highly recommend looking up those bloopers. Are well worth it. And now it's time to open Greg's Sack Lunch. Greg is our most dedicated contributor to this podcast, and every week he sends us his sack lunch full of his thoughts. First in Greg's sack are his overall thoughts. He says, "I have always really liked this episode because it feels very well-rounded amongst the four, and the weaving of the storylines all works very well." Yes, I totally agree, Greg. Feels like all four get a really good chunk of plot and time allotted. Yes, it is very well balanced. Not surprising, because Larry David was one of the writers on this episode. He is a master at really balancing out and weaving all the storylines together. After all, it was sort of his brainchild, the dovetailing, if you will. All right, next in Greg's sack are his favorite scenes and Elaine moments. He says, "Every scene with Elaine in this episode is great. She's mostly only playing off of Jerry and Putty for the bulk of her story, but my favorite scene is probably when everyone is together at Jerry's apartment. George comes in singing with flowers and talking about the crayon he's dating, and it's all very sweet. While Elaine and Jerry punch holes in his toilet paper theories and how surprisingly he's never said I love you, George still leaves this very optimistic. It seems as though we don't get a ton of George and Elaine together lately, so I cherish this one scene they share." Yes, I agree. I'll get more into that a little bit later in the episode, Greg, but I do love that little moment where he pulls the flowers away from her. Next, Greg says, "My absolute favorite moment in this whole show, and one of my favorite moments of the entire series, is when Jerry and Elaine are at Gary Fogel's funeral and you can hear women audibly sobbing, and Elaine starts talking about how she hates all her clothes. The essence of this entire show about nothing is right there in that moment. These people are cold and hardened and self-centered, yet they're very funny and somewhat relatable. The way there's a break of even more crying, and then Elaine starts up again about her wardrobe. It's perfect." Absolutely. It is. You're right. It's exactly what we love about this show and about these characters. And yeah, it's in this little micro moment of just how these people don't give a shit about the tragedy of this event. They're at a funeral. It just shows like these people can be at a funeral and not be moved at all by emotion. I mean, I don't care who you are. I remember a while back, I went to a funeral with a friend, and I didn't know the person who had passed away, but this friend just felt like she needed some support. So I went with her, and I mean, granted, I'm not as cold as Jerry and Elaine, but I remember just being at the funeral and just seeing the people around me. And it was a very tragic event. It was a sudden death of this person, and she was pretty young. And anyway, I just remember I was in tears because just observing the emotion around me and kind of taking in, like, I didn't know this person at all who had passed away. I was just there for, to be a support to my friend, but I couldn't help but be affected by the grieving going on around me. But yeah, to your point, Greg, I mean, this is just, you boil it all down to this scene, and that's what we love about them and we can sort of relate to. Sometimes, yeah, it's like, you're just going to be worrying about yourself and your wardrobe or whatever it is, whatever shallow thing is going on in your life that just seems more important than people around you. I love it so much. It is, I agree, probably one of the strongest scenes of the series because of that reason. It's just a simple way to show how incredibly self-centered and shallow these people are. Greg goes on to say, my other favorite Elaine moment is when she's with Putty at her place and he's talking about how he thinks dip should be allowed to be a meal. She just sort of glares at him, and I love that shot of her because we know what she's thinking. Why am I with this person? Yes, exactly. Like you said, Greg, and I agree. A lot of this episode, JLD is just kind of the straight character to either Jerry or Putty, but it's these subtle moments where she is getting the humor because of her face. Like, we talk about her face acting a lot. And this scene where she's just like, holy shit. You can read everything from that expression. And it's hilarious. I mean, I don't think she gets a ton of comedy in this episode, but whatever she does get, those little moments, she really milks them and does it perfectly. Next, Greg says, I also like the scene where Putty first comes out with the face paint on, scaring Elaine. While last episode I said I'm not a huge fan of the Putty character, this is my favorite episode with him. I like this issue being something that Elaine is prepared to dump him over. That little moment where she's touched that he's willing not to do it makes her do a 180 and feel charmed by him. That lasts for only seconds. Yes, I went into this a little bit before about how this is the guy to trip Elaine up, and this whole episode is a great example of that because, we find out when she first meets Putty, she's sort of, it's not as bad as Tony, but it's more physical, right? Like, oh yeah, he's a mechanic. He works with his hands all day and he's just dripping with animal sexuality. So it's like, we know kind of the base reason why Elaine is attracted to Putty, but then how far is she willing to look past kind of the obvious shortfalls? He's a little bit of a bonehead. He's not deep at all. But this face painting, it's a brilliant issue for her to deal with. I completely agree. And like you said, Greg, just the 180 she does, and it's so sweet. She's so flattered, which again, I think is a testament to what shitty guys she's dated in the past, including Jerry. Ooh, next in the sack, I find Greg's scene swap idea. He says, of course, they had to give Kramer something to do, and of course, it has to be something completely ridiculous. While the zoo scenes are fine, and I'm glad it ties into Sienna working there, I could take it or leave it. That said, it really doesn't take away from anything else. I agree. It's become clear a lot of times. I think you and I agree on this a lot. The Kramer storylines, they're never that strong. For me personally, I think they definitely get better as time goes on, but we get these ones every now and then where I'm like, oh my gosh, like the one that stands out to me is the whole Risk thing with Newman. Like, that actually irritates me. I'm like, I don't give a shit about Risk. But anyway, I'll go more into my scene swap ideas later. But I think I think Michael Richards does a really good job with this performance. So I actually love this monkey storyline. And finally, in Greg's sack are his extra thoughts. He says, this is a rare episode where George is not an ass in any moments. I genuinely feel for him the entire time as he's trying to declare his love for this crayon. She's a woman, Greg. Jeez. Normally he does something that makes you hate him or that is so petty you get why he loses the girlfriend. But he's a good guy here. Yeah, that is true. I didn't think about it in that way. But yeah. Sienna's kind of the jerk face here, right? I mean, and once again, like I said earlier, this is a very no-dimensional character. So we don't even really understand why she doesn't say I love you back or anything like that. I do want to mention, this actually is a good time to bring up the fact that there was a deleted scene, or I guess an alternate ending, where he says I love you to her in both ears. And she's sort of taken aback and she goes, I love you too. And then he's so excited that she's returned it that he goes, will you marry me? And she says yes. And then she puts her head on his shoulder and we see George, like the expression on his face, immediately regret that. Like, why the hell did I just ask her to marry me? So he's like in another bind. So that was an alternate ending. I don't love it. I kind of like that she had hurt him, but yeah, it's kind of left undefined as to why she's just like, yeah, I know. But I was just really hungry. I wanted to get something to eat that night. But it's all to say that, yeah, George really didn't do anything wrong. He is so endearing. Like I said, Jason Alexander's performance, like Giddy George, I think is so cute. When he like sits and like leans back on the couch, he was fascinated. Like he's so adorable. Next, Greg says, I did notice the real Kenny Kramer and Mark Stoller behind the gang at the hockey game. I rarely pay attention to background actors, but this podcast has me looking for details, so I have some extra thoughts in this extra thoughts section. I think you mean Fred Stoller, who is the co-writer for this episode. Yes, and you're right. He also will go on to play the man who never remembers Elaine in a later episode. But yes, you're right. Kenny Kramer sure is there. Greg also says, another thing I noticed is that Putty said he was a Devils fan since he was a kid. But I know that's a flub because the Devils have only been a team since the 80s. Oh yes, this has been pointed out not only in the Goofs section of the IMDb page, but also in the notes about nothing they mentioned this because, yeah, that's basically impossible because, yeah, like you said, the team's only been around since the 80s. And finally, Greg says, my last comment is on Elaine's appearance in the last scene with the priest. She looks absolutely gorgeous there. I know that's a superficial comment, but I'm making it anyway. Not a big deal. Oh, let it fly, Greg. I don't care if you make, especially if you're saying that JLD looks amazing because she's so incredibly beautiful. And I always point out when she looks sexy and cute. So I think maybe as a woman, it's more acceptable, but I give you permission, Greg, if that changes. I mean, I don't want your next act to just be talking about JLD's body or whatever, but you know what's appropriate. I think she looks great in that last scene, but I'm just not a fan of it. Like I said, I think the priest thing is just so unnecessary. Like, why is she invested in this guy? Thank you so much, Greg, for sending in your sack full of thoughts, and we look forward to more thoughts in the future. And now it's time to close Greg's sack lunch. All right, next, my favorite Elaine moments. They're both in that scene where Putty reveals his face. I love the stumble, startle, whatever you want to call it. But how she literally almost falls over is so funny to me. Again, physicality is one of JLD's strengths, and she's fantastic at it, where it's that right amount. It's not over the top like maybe Michael Richards would do, but she does the perfect Elaine believable amount. So I love that. And it's very closely followed by because it's insane. I just love that delivery. And my final thoughts of the episode. This is a really strong episode overall. To echo what Greg said, it's super balanced, really good weaving of all the storylines together. So that's what always makes a great Seinfeld episode, and always what Larry David does when he writes an episode. Now, when I think about it, it's not the strongest Elaine episode as far as comedy. She's a bit overpowered by Putty here. And this is Patrick Warburton's second episode. And so, and like I said, in that first episode he was in, people were so bowled over by his performance and taken by him. In fact, they talk about how Jerry Seinfeld the following week was doing an impression of Patrick Warburton as Putty, like around the set, like a week after he had done it. So obviously he had this impact. So I think they were so focused on giving him a lot of the comedy that JLD had to sort of take a back seat to him and be the straight performer to him. But again, that's just as important. I've talked about this before on the podcast. You think, oh, you're not getting the laughs, it's just not as good. But no, I mean, if you're the support person and you're that straight person to allow the comedy to happen, it's just as important. I mean, that's part of the formula to making something successfully funny. And like what Greg pointed out, that one scene, all she did was look at him. Just look at him with that expression after he makes that comment about dip. And you laugh because you're just like, she's just giving that one face going, what the fuck am I doing with this guy? It is so funny. And that's sometimes all you need. Now, as I said before, I think Elaine could have weighed in a bit more on the whole I love you stuff with George. or the thank you stuff with Jerry. There were great storylines here in this episode, but all they gave Elaine was the reaction to Putty, which is funny. I like that. And the scared priest. The priest thing is just so weird and it's so weak. I just am not a fan of it. And also I want to point out something that just doesn't make sense in the universe of Seinfeld. Like, why is Elaine at the funeral with Jerry and not George? After all, George was friends with Gary Fogel. Like, there's a whole episode with George and Gary, so I don't understand why Elaine, it's not even clear if Elaine really knows Gary. So it's just kind of odd that Elaine is at the funeral with Jerry. I mean, that scene is incredibly funny, like we've talked about and like Greg mentioned, but just in the continuity and the universe of the show, it just kind of doesn't make sense. All right, my scene swap idea, I would have focused a little less time on the Alec Berg stuff and just a little bit more time with Putty and Elaine. Now, I'm not sure if that would have included expanding on the face painter stuff or just exposing other things about him that she finds perplexing or just kind of a turnoff. I don't know what that entails, but I just think the Alec Berg stuff could have been just taken down a little bit and just like amped up more Putty and Elaine stuff. Like, I would have loved to see maybe like the dip comment's great, but maybe, and I'm not saying it has to be something else painted, but maybe other things like akin to the dip comment where we're seeing Elaine just going like, why am I with this person? But one thing is for sure, I keep the monkey. All right. Barry rules and I don't want to lose Barry at all. And I think that's all I can say about the face painter. And there's one more episode this season. I cannot believe I'm almost done with season 6. We are just chugging along on this podcast. I love it. I'm really excited to cover the understudy next week and dive into season 7. It just gets better from here, I mean, we are not just in the prime of Seinfeld, but like ultimate Seinfeld we are getting to. So it's just going to keep getting better and better, guys. So tell your friends, listen to Hot and Heavy, spread the word. Also, make sure you are following Hot and Heavy on social media. On Instagram, it's at Hot Heavy Elaine. And on TikTok, it's at Elaine Bennis Podcast. And if you'd like to email me, please do at elainepodcast@gmail.com. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you next time.